I don't think I've ever played a video game sequel that left me with a vastly different opinion than its predecessor. I mean, that's usually what a sequel is, right? Just more of the same. Or a continuation with a few additions to spice things up. Maybe some updated graphics. A few more beats in the narrative. And that's normally just how it is with video game sequels. You slap a 2 on the box and people are going to know what to expect. But this is how Ori and the Will of the Wisps changes, well, everything. Before I get into the video essay, just wanted to jump in here and remind you to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more video essays like this one. And if you'd like to financially support me in producing more of this content in the future, since it's really not cheap, I have a Ko-fi page linked in my description as well as the pinned comment, but more about that at the end of the video. Video game sequels, by their nature, are pretty weird. Every sequel has a different goal: to give us more of what we liked in the first one, to shake up the formula, to completely throw out the formula and start over from square one, to continue the story that we got so invested in, to just make more money off of a familiar IP, to be a remake, but also a sequel, I think? To keep us waiting and waiting, or to do this. So how do you evaluate a sequel? On its own merits? How it improves on the first? I think for me, a video game sequel is all about expectations. I naturally have expectations from playing a prior game. And expectations are what make me want to pick up a sequel in the first place. If I like the first game, I'm most likely going to want more of it. And that's how you get a year like 2023, where most of the major releases, while incredible, were basically all sequels. Follow-ups on established IPs are guaranteed to make money after all. Even games that aren't really related to previous hits, aside from some gameplay similarities, are going to bring in significantly more sales if they have a recognizable name attached. And that's not necessarily bad either. As a consumer, if I have $60 in my pocket, $70 in my pocket, and you put 2 games in front of me, one being a follow-up to a game I loved, and one being something completely new, even if you told me I would like the completely new game way better, I'd be much more likely to fork over my hard-earned capitalism bucks for cozy familiarity. By and large, that's what gets a sequel made in the first place. Numbers. Since games are getting more and more expensive to produce every year, they're also becoming more and more of a risk. So if a publisher needs to spend upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars or more to get a video game to ship, they're naturally going to want a good return on their investment. It's why the big old $70 AAA games with all the DLC and microtransactions keep coming out, and why those releases are almost never original IPs anymore. Most publishers aren't aiming for the next uber-polished games as an art form cult classic. They want a hit with a potential waterfall of installments and guaranteed flowing streams of cash. Because capitalism. However, once in a blue moon, that cult classic does have its day. Maybe that game you loved as a kid gets another moment in the spotlight, taking that beloved underdog and not just giving people more, but giving them what the first was missing, to fill gaps and polish rough edges, and maybe even more importantly from the perspective of the people who put every fiber of their being into this project, to sell even better than the first one. So that brings us to Ori and the Will of the Wisps. No pressure, little guy. For what it's worth, this video essay is itself a sequel. And to echo that question you hear anytime a video game gets a follow-up. Do I need to watch the first one before watching this video? And, well, it would be nice if you did. It's a good video, and a few of my video essay friends are in it too. But to give you a quick recap, Ori and the Blind Forest and I didn't get along. I wasn't a fan of the floaty controls paired with the slippery platforming, the lackluster combat, the Metroidvania but not really level design, that fucking tree, and on top of that, I felt the story employed some pretty cheap tactics to get players emotionally invested before walking it all back in the final moments anyway. Killing off a character less than 5 minutes after meeting them, and then bringing them back to life out of nowhere just before credits? Come on. So needless to say, going into Will of the Wisps, I wasn't really expecting to love it, I'll be honest. But after I posted my critique of Ori and the Blind Forest, pretty much every comment encouraged me to try the sequel. But despite all these glowing recommendations, I still kinda thought Will of the Wisps was just gonna be more of the Ori I had come to know and not really love. That's another thing about sequels. You never really know what you're gonna get. Will it go down the same path that its predecessor paved for it, making minor adjustments here and there? Or will it blaze its own trail, whether for better or worse? I was skeptical, to say the least. So many people loved the direction of Blind Forest that I couldn't see Moon Studios changing it all that much. After all, while the game wasn't to my taste, plenty of people still love it to this day. It remains in the ranks of runaway indie success stories, having sold over 1.9 million copies and reviewing incredibly well. For a first-time development team, given with industry veterans at the helm, that's no small feat. So why stray from the formula that worked for so many? I just had this gut feeling that Ori and the Will of the Wisps wasn't going to be for me. But oh man, I was wrong. From the very first moments of the game, I could tell this felt different. Here in the prologue, we check back in with the characters we met during Ori's first adventure. Back in the magical forest, peace reigns, and this chosen family celebrates the birth of Ku, hatched from the egg left behind by the scorned owl antagonist of the first game. Ori shares in some sibling bonding with their new baby sister. First steps: family meals under a tree, quite literally, and even some wintertime activities. Like, look at that! Is Naru building a snowman? Snow Naru? These first few minutes are so expressive and full of vivid joy. It's so lively, but we see Ku isn't content. The events of the first game left one of her wings badly damaged. She's unable to fly much at all. And you can see her yearning to join other birds in the clouds above. If I wanted to be cynical and mirror a point that I made in my previous video essay about Ori and the Blind Forest, I'd draw another Pixar parallel. Ku's wing and Nemo's fin aren't at all dissimilar, but this feels like we're starting from the same seed and growing a completely different plant. And what's more, this opening is building on previous character connections and backstory. We're not starting from square one and throwing in a character passing away out of nowhere. This feels like a more natural way to open a story. And the interactions here, the motivations, they feel a bit more human as well. I can relate to wanting to fly, but feeling my wing is missing some feathers. Like I'm surrounded by support, while still somehow feeling alone. Other. Heartwarmingly, Ori finds a way to make Ku's dreams come true, using an upgrade we earned during the events of Blind Forest. It gives us a lovely little callback while also tying a piece of Ku's mother to her story, even after her passing. This is how you set up a sequel. I love that Will of the Wisps sets me up to love these characters without using tragedy to do it. Instead, getting me to care about what their goals are, why we're back in this world in the first place. And most of all, it gets me excited to play the game. There's emotion, sure, but it feels like we've gone through a full arc already before we even get to the meat of the game. The player doesn't start off completely gutted. Instead, this feels like a triumphant shot from a starting pistol. Like, just look at these visuals. Listen to this music. Oh man, this game is going to be amazing. Ori and the Will of the Wisps changes everything. When we wake up in this foreign landscape, we're again presented with this thick, moody atmosphere. Rain is gushing out of the sky. It's aggressive and cold. Ori struggles to stand. A familiar setup. But after some stormy platforming to get me in the groove, this immediately felt like a different game. Will of the Wisps felt like it wasn't afraid to be a Metroidvania this time around. The first sign of this being clearly everything in this frame is directing me to go to the right. The rain, the wind, even the little lemur dudes ran that way. But I can go to the left if I really feel like it. Freedom. I couldn't go very far before I needed an upgrade to continue, but hey, it was indicative of the way the game would unfold. Moon Studios really embraced what, for me, makes a memorable Metroidvania experience. The moveset. I felt like in Blind Forest, I wasn't given a whole lot of interesting tools that made my movement feel unique to that game. Nothing felt new or surprising, except for Bash. And I know it has its defenders, but I was unfortunately not a Bash enjoyer. I know, sorry. But Will of the Wisps introduces a f***ing cornucopia of new movement options that I've never seen in other Metroidvanias before. Like this. And this. And these. Like, the creativity here is just on another level. And I love it. This is what I wanted, and chaining all of these things together throughout the game feels so smooth. I think the agility and light as a feather feeling that Blind Forest was aiming for read to most folks, even diehard fans, as floaty button inputs. And in a game all about movement and platforming, that's really not what you want. Here, because of these new and improved ways in which Ori can interact with their environment, everything feels much smoother and much more fine-tuned. There are so many little tweaks that just make Ori feel much more responsive. Like, look at Ori's jump side by side in both games. While the jump is still expressive and fluid in motion, everything is much tighter. Less delay, less hang time. The controls don't feel like they're fighting me anymore, which is good, because the controls being more refined means Ori can fight. I mean, I knew things were getting good when I got here. and I curiously walked up to that fire, pressed X, and picked up a weapon? To those who haven't played either of the Ori titles, this probably sounds like the most basic thing. A weapon? In a Metroidvania? Groundbreaking. Listen, we had it rough in the first game, okay? While holding a button down and waiting for projectiles to be randomly conjured by my floating bubble buddy in Blind Forest was considered combat? In the land of Niwen, Ori finds a whole arsenal of weapons to wield. Weapons that I got to swing in the direction that I wanted. Again, sounds like a given, but when Ori combat used to look like this, swinging around a hefty hammer or throwing a spear with deadly accuracy is just really nice. Not only that, but I got to customize my build. Ori has builds now, and since Ori and the Will of the Wisps has actual combat, you know what that means? Boss fights. And really memorable boss fights, some of which rival the quality of some of my favorite 2D Metroidvania bosses. And even though classic Ori chase sequences make their return, now that we've got solid combat, we actually get to fight back against some of these larger-than-life foes. And look at some of these guys. So cool. It feels empowering to fell these corrupted giants, rather than just running away. The amount of spectacle on display is really breathtaking. Not what I was expecting at all going into this follow-up, especially after waking up in Niwen for the first time. The opening storm here was full of visual callbacks to adventures past, dark cobalt tones, creaking wood, venomous purples, almost as if the game was setting me up with false expectations, because once the game got going, whoa. This game is not afraid of color at all. Diving into the Luma pools with their contrasting blues and pinks, it's just delightful. Bright, colorful Whoville vibes. But then you come down here and the sand feels warm and inviting. It's not just different biomes, but completely different moods. Different atmospheres that kept me excited to see what else the game had in store. Even in these darker depths, it was like all of the ideas that Moon Studios had previously got turned up to 11. There were times in Ori and the Blind Forest where the visuals could make for a great desktop background, but in motion, they were a little tough to decipher in the heat of the moment, especially with that hazy glow from the bloom effect on basically everything. Foreground elements getting between me and slippery platforming, and an odd lack of contrast at times that made it hard to decipher where I was supposed to be going in high-stress escapes. But Will of the Wisps looks great in motion too, with much more legible contrast, more interesting color palettes, and just all around more polish that makes the world feel alive. But the biggest improvement of all is this game's writing. Here's why. Blind Forest and Will of the Wisps actually follow pretty similar formulas when you break it down to the simplest elements. Ori loses a friend, wakes up weak and feeble, but through restoring the world around them, receives upgrades to help along the journey, all while outrunning a sympathetic antagonist. For those of you who think I have a heart of stone, well, you're right. But the main narrative genuinely brought me to tears this time around. I've gone from eye rolls to full-on waterworks. Emotional moments in media are extremely subjective. What tugs on your heartstrings may not tug on mine. We're all bringing our own baggage and perspective to these stories, but you can almost always tell when a video game wants you to cry. I mentioned this in my previous Ori video essay, but Naru's passing felt a little cheap to me. By which I mean, with only 5 minutes to get to know this character and no real character development, I had no reason to feel a connection to Naru. This introduction almost feels mean-spirited, because ultimately this death doesn't even matter, almost like a jump scare, but instead of an image accompanied with shrill noises, it's a lovable forest creature dying of hunger. All for a quick reaction. and then we never really think about it again because we're not shown Ori being affected by this moment at all. It doesn't affect the plot and doesn't really change Ori as a character at all. But in Moon Studios' follow-up, the "please cry now" moment comes here. That emotional music swell, it wrecked me. After we've spent most of this game running from this monstrosity, we're given some backstory to flesh out where it's coming from. With a birth defect leaving Shriek moving and looking very differently to other owls, she's cast aside, a lonely exile from society given no love. No one reaching out to protect her. Shriek isn't just an outsider scorned. She's what Ku could have become as well. A cautionary tale and a dark path that anyone could fall down if not shown compassion or kindness during hard times. We've all felt like that outsider, lonely, unwelcome. And what's more, this moment has a lasting effect on Shriek and serves to explain their motivations. It's emotionally resonant while also having a narrative purpose. And this isn't dropped on you right at the beginning. There's a little time for the story to develop before we're asked to be invested. There's a foreplay. Anyway, one of my favorite tropes in a video game that gets me immersed in a world is when you get to see your progress through the title reflected in the world itself. Something as simple as seeing Dirtmouth filled with insectoid citizens as you help them. Or Terrytown getting developed as you find new inhabitants in Breath of the Wild. It just scratches that itch in the back of my brain, you know? With that in mind, this is Wellspring Glades, Ori and the Will of the Wisps hub area. And as I spent more time doing side quests and investing into upgrades, the sparse lakeside setting gave way to a sprawling oasis. I built up this quaint little settlement to feel more lived in, while getting nice gameplay benefits along the way. When I advanced these charming micro stories and side quests, I became more invested in these little lemur guys and whatever this guy is. And because this is such a central area that I often looped back through, I felt so much more immersed in the journey I was on. I was constantly seeing my improvements to this world in action. The charming hub area served as a safe haven for not only me, but for the citizens of Niwen as well. That's right, this game has characters that you can talk to. It seems like such a no-brainer, but when I went back to capture Blind Forest footage, I realized how lifeless the world felt. And while that does align with the dying forest motif, seeing a world full of characters with motivations and backstories and little quips of their own felt so refreshing. It gave me a reason to care about saving this new world from an encroaching decay. The rot plaguing Niwen was separating families and displacing innocent civilians. The downfall of the first game's forest, from what we saw, affected like 4 characters, all of whom didn't speak. No longer was I hearing a disembodied mumble narrator the entire time. I was talking to these people I was saving, and they give this adventure so much personality. And this guy, he's the best. Video game sequels, by their nature, are pretty weird. Inherently, their existence hinges on expectation. That can be a blessing and a curse. Expectations almost held me back from ever trying this game that I ended up loving. To everyone who encouraged me to play this game after I didn't really get along with the original title, thank you. And needless to say, this sequel completely exceeded my expectations. And as video game sequels go, I can't think of a better example of a follow-up not only surpassing the original, but correcting course enough to appease initial critics while still keeping existing fans happy. It's a near impossible balance to strike, but Ori and the Will of the Wisps tiptoes that tightrope with grace. It feels like this was the game that Moon Studios wanted to make all along. The things that people fell in love with in the first game, I see coming to fruition here. I never thought I would say this, but Ori and the Will of the Wisps is one of my favorite video game sequels of all time. As great as Baldur's Gate 3 is, it barely feels like a sequel to the series' first two entries. Spider-Man 2 didn't really add all that much to the first game. It's mostly the same game, just more of it. And even Tears of the Kingdom, with all its improvements, additions, and changes, just felt okay. And Final Fantasy 16, well, it's Final Fantasy. It doesn't really count here. 2023 was stacked with all of these amazing sequels and follow-ups, but they almost felt great in spite of being sequels. They didn't really do a whole lot to play with our expectations. Great games, but not many felt surprising? Safe bets, installments, or glorified expansions rather than exciting big swings. You slap a bigger number on the box and you kind of know what it's going to be. And from the most jaded perspective, sequels are that calculated cash grab. They need to be an easy investment for those pumping millions of dollars into video game production nowadays. But after playing Ori and the Will of the Wisps, I'm a video game sequel believer again. They can be surprising and exciting, and a complete 180 from the experience you had the first time around. When does a sequel prove you wrong, you know? Contrary to popular belief, I actually love being proven wrong, having my expectations challenged, and being surprised. So, yeah, I was wrong about Ori and the Will of the Wisps, and I couldn't be happier about it. Still hate Bash, though. Hey there, thank you for watching the video essay. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you're subscribed and hit the like button down below because it really helps the channel grow, which now means more than ever because I unexpectedly got laid off from my job out of nowhere. So I guess I'm a full-time content person now here and on my Twitch. And speaking of that, thank you so much to Oyster Milk, Dear Papaya, Voxamandius, Puzzled Monkey Tree, Mumpow, Veltwalker, Beanfiello, Paula, Nightmare God, Sarah, Cap Danvers, Robertson, Max Wattage, John Lax, Lionbite, and Comrade Quest. Those are my monthly supporters over on my Ko-fi page who make video essays like this one possible. And if you don't know what Ko-fi is, it's sort of like Patreon, but a whole lot cooler. So if you want to support this content financially, I've pinned a comment down below with a link to the Ko-fi page. And over there, for as little as $4 a month, you can get behind the scenes access to future video essays, shoutouts at the end here, and lots of fun extra stuff. Or if you're not feeling that, you can always drop a one-time donation over there as well. Any amount of support is appreciated, especially right now. Another way you can help support is by checking out the description below for links to any of the games that I mention in any of my video essays. If you buy anything with those Humble Bundle affiliate links, I get a cut of it, as well as trans charities as well, at no extra cost to you. So it's kind of a win-win-win, especially if you were gonna buy those games anyway. Oh yeah, another huge thing you can do to help these videos out for free is share the video.